Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
with your host, the Sir of Beer, Chris Powell.
And Laura Bosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month, we invite a guest author to read their work and talk about writing while sipping beer or cocktail specially paired to their work.
Today's guest is John Graham.
So sit back
Pop a cold one
and dive into some books.
and brews. Welcome to Books and Brews, episode number 69. So, Laura, what have you been doing this month?
Well, lots of boring stuff like Startled by Music. Our poetry anthology is now out. We have Thanksgiving, so some kids came. Dustin and I are almost done with the sheep shelter before we start painting.
He's our farmhand.
Yes, but the biggest news is it turns out our boy Jack down in the rabbit hutch turns out to be our girl, Jackie.
And she just...
And I went down today and our boy Jack had about 9 or 10 little kits in the cage with him. And I don't think one of the female does snuck those babies in.
So I think Jack is a Jane.
I think Jack is, we're going to call her Jackie. So yeah, how about you?
Oh, well.
Anything interesting?
I've been working like crazy and very eager to get back to Books and Brews. But, other than that, I did go to the supercomputing conference in Atlanta for a week. And I had a wonderful time there learning about neuromorphic and quantum and all sorts of ridiculous things that nobody knows how to spell.
And that's about all you've read this month, too, isn't it?
100%.
Well,
yes.
you're a step ahead of me because I've read nothing.
You read? I read the classifieds. That's all I read.
I have read our guest's website.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And he's got quite a website as well.
He has an amazing website.
So speaking of him, who is our guest this month?
Our guest today is somebody who makes my life look incredibly boring and dull. So thank you, John. We have with us today John Graham. Now, John has a very exciting and, shall we say, storied past. He shipped out on a freighter when he was 16, hitchhiked through the Algerian Revolution at 19, and was on the team that made the first ascent of Denali's North Wall when he was 20. It is a climb so dangerous it has never been repeated, and I have questions about that. He hitchhiked across the world at the age of 22, working as a correspondent in every war he came across. And unfortunately, I think it's pretty easy to stumble across wars these days. As the U.S. Foreign Service officer for 15 years, he was in the middle of the 1969 revolution in Libya and the war in Vietnam. As the global peace builder post-Foreign Service, he contributed to peace efforts in Israel and Palestine. For the last 42 years, he has been a leader of the Giraffe Heroes Project, a global movement inspiring people to stick their necks out to solve public problems and giving them tools to succeed. His speeches, blogs, podcasts, and interviews have a global audience. So welcome to Books and Brews, John.
I'm happy to be here, and thank you for that lavish introduction.
It's amazing reading your website, and I am really excited to talk to you. So we are going to start off with the cocktail that Chris picked for your first reading.
Yes, this is a marvelous cocktail. It's actually called the Shipwreck, of all things. Can you imagine? And of course, if you're going to be doing anything on a ship, you need to have dark rum. So we have the Kraken spiced dark rum to go into this, along with some pineapple juice, some lime juice, some honey, and a bit of additional pineapple in it as well. So it gives you a kind of a wonderful taste that, yes, you would love to have, especially if you have a lifeboat. And so cheers.
Cheers.
The technology does not permit me to have one. Oh, man. What a loser.
As busy a life as you've had, I'm surprised that you did not invent that technology because we all know that busy people are the ones to ask to get something done, right?
Yeah.
Anybody who knows me knows I don't have a very strong sense of smell, and I can smell this, and it's really a very pleasant smell. Is it the rum that I'm smelling?
Yes,
maybe?
the spiced rum
And
with the
a bit of the
pineapple.
honey.
Yeah, and the honey, of course, is going to give you a nice glow as well, with just a little bit of lime juice to keep a little bit of an edge on it.
Right. So that is the Shipwreck, and listeners will soon find out why Chris picked this. So, John, go ahead with the first reading.
Well, it's the first reading. I got to give you a little bit of an introduction. I did have that life, that early part of my life was full of crazy ass adventures, one kind or the other. But the downside of it was that my life, in my view, had become really shallow. All I cared about was an adrenaline rush, and one risk was always bigger than the next, and I kept going and going, but without much of a thought to other people or toward making any kind of a positive dent in the world. Then there came a battle in Vietnam. It really turned me around, and it took me a while to reorient my life toward doing something good in the world. I ended up at the United Nations, where I, in fact, did some good in the world, like helping end apartheid and stuff. So I quit the Foreign Service, looking forward for a life of being of service. And then I panicked over money. I just panicked because I didn't have a Foreign Service salary anymore. So I looked for a job, and I found a job lecturing on cruise ships. I mean, I'd always had a good gift of gab. So I figured, what the hell? Someone's going to tell me, going to pay me for giving a speech. I'll do that.
Right.
And so I went with my daughter Mallory on a cruise ship called the Princeton Dam, heading from Vancouver for a summer of cruising in the Far East. 3 days out of Vancouver, this damn ship catches fire and starts sinking in the Gulf of Alaska. And here's where the story picks up and why the drink is so appropriate. The ship is sinking, right? So we're all 550 people are taken into lifeboats. Problem is, it's a typhoon coming on, and a Typhoon Vernon, and it's serious. And the lifeboats are little cockle shells. We're 150 miles off the coast from Alaska. A whole armada of helicopters and rescue ships is heading for us, but we're a long way from shore, and the weather's getting worse and worse, and we're all dying of hypothermia, and it's a really desperate situation. So here I pick up from my book, Quest. The 11 of us watched the helicopter disappear into the storm. We didn't know it then, but the chopper would not be back. It had become suicidal to challenge the storm again from the air. Our fate now rested with one of two Coast Guard cutters searching against odds for us in the storm. I struggled hand over hand to the Radio Shack and tried to power up the radio, but the battery was dead. The SOS I was tapping on the telegraph key was going nowhere. The lifeboat had a light, but it was powered by the same battery as the radio. We could find no flares. It was now 5:15 p.m. We'd been in the lifeboat 12 hours. The choppers had gone for good. The critical factor now was not Typhoon Vernon, but the fading light. There was a small enough chance that the cutters would find us in the storm in daylight, but the chances of finding us at night, with no flares, no lights, and no radio, were non-existent, and the cold would kill us before the dawn. By 5:30, visibility was down to 100 yards. In the bow, facing the oncoming seas, I watched 20-foot waves tower over us in every trough, then braced myself as they flung the little boat skyward and rammed it down again. The wind ripped off the tops of the waves, sending seawater into the lifeboat so cold it sucked the breath out of us. Up until that moment, I'd assumed that this crisis, like all the others in my life, would take me to the brink of death, but not beyond. It was another adrenaline rush, another adventure I would walk away from, another story to add to my repertoire. The stories always ended the same. I survived. Even when that last helicopter had left, I figured there'd be another way out because there always was. But now, as the gray seas merged with darkening gray skies, it struck me that this time I actually was going to die. I tried to talk to God, to the universal presence, but every time I closed my eyes and tried to go there, I was pulled back by anger. The more I thought about it, my dying now must be a mistake. In the years since Vietnam, I'd slowly crawled out of an unconscious, self-centered hole. Now I was about to put everything I'd learned to work, helping make a better world. I'd even left the Foreign Service so I could devote myself to this new life. So how is it now? On the brink of this beginning, I was being wiped out. I'd always assumed that there was an order and a logic to the universe, but my death now didn't make any sense. It didn't make one damn bit of sense. I glared into the teeth of the storm. and I hurl one word into the slashing rain. Why? The answer came at once, not as a physical sound that others could hear, but as a voice that enveloped me as if I was standing inside a circle of loudspeakers. You know your purpose is to heal, but now you're fleeing it, the voice said. You have a choice. You can choose to ignore your ideals and you'll die out here. But that'll be better than a lifetime of excuses and regrets. Or you can get serious about your life's purpose and do what you need to do. I looked at the other 10 shapes in that lifeboat. None of them seemed to have heard anything. When I looked back into the storm, I could hardly feel my feet and hands. I was exhausted, dying of the cold. I had nothing left. Okay, I said, looking straight into the storm, rain lashing my face. Okay. What happened next sounds straight out of a grade B movie, but it's the truth. At that instant, an instant of surrender, a dark shape burst out of the storm off the port bow. It was the Coast Guard cutter Boutwell, heading right for us. That's the first question.
Very nice.
So that was an amazing story. And the first question I had was, did everybody survive?
Yes, it was utterly amazing. Now, the Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard says this is the most important air-sea rescue ever in the entire history of the Coast Guard, going back to like 1770.
Wow.
It was amazing because you had the boat, we were 140 miles, 150 miles off the coast. We were in the typhoon. Helicopters could only fly for a few minutes over the lifeboats, picking people off one at a time. So I saw I said my daughter was with me. Well, she was in the lifeboat. She got picked off by a helicopter before the helicopters couldn't fly. And then there were just 8 of us left in the lifeboat. And the chances of being rescued were just like nil. So yeah, it was pretty interesting.
And I bet that was pretty dramatic, sending her off with the helicopter and her having to leave you behind.
Yes, it was. It was. And there's a picture that made the front page of almost every newspaper in the country of me finally linking up with her at Seattle Airport. She was taken by a helicopter to a tanker that had answered the SOS, and the helicopters would land on the big flat deck of the tanker, drop off 7 or 8 people, come back for another load. On the other hand, when the helicopters couldn't fly anymore, there was no longer an option for me. And the only option was that cutter, which, as the story relates, finally comes at the very, very last minute. I mean, we were within half an hour of cashing in. So I was taken to a separate. He went to Valdez, I went to Sitka. So we were apart for another 2 days. So we finally met, and this picture that was in all those newspapers was a picture of her jumping into my arms at the Seattle airport.
How old was she at the time?
13.
Oh, she was young. Okay, that must have been terrifying for her. Especially, I mean,
she's very tough.
Well, she would be after that. That's for sure.
And I was just going to say, we have a saying which we still use. She's now in her mid-50s, but we still use this. And it goes like this. One of us says, when the going gets tough, and the other responds, the tough get going.
That's right. That's what builds life. Now, I'm very curious. Before this incident with the cruise ship, you had been a war correspondent. Had you already been in NATO before this cruise ship?
Oh, yes, yes. The cruise ship was after I left the Foreign Service. My foreign service day included 3 years working for NATO for the Nuclear Planning Group, which is a whole other bunch of stories.
Yes.
I spent my days figuring out how to turn Leningrad and Moscow into glass, targeting nuclear missiles.
So you weren't working on peace with Leningrad and Moscow?
No, like I say, my trip from being a self-interested, selfish young person looking for the next adrenaline rush into being a savior of the world was not an easy or quick transformation.
Well, and my question was, here you were doing war correspondence in Algeria, in Vietnam. Do I have that right?
Yes, I was doing that before I
Okay.
joined the Foreign Service. I was doing that right out of college.
Okay. What was it that made you decide you were self-centered?
Well, you know, it's interesting. It was a battle in Vietnam. It's a long story, but I
Mhm.
realized suddenly that I was doing everything just for the adrenaline rush, and I really didn't give a damn. And I was in the middle of a horrendous amount of suffering. All of my
Mhm.
career in the Foreign Service, too, was about watching people suffer because my career wasn't in embassies in Europe. I was in wars and revolutions, like including the revolution in Libya, and I saw nothing but suffering. And it didn't make a dent on me because all I cared about was the next big risk,
Mhm.
The next John Wayne thing I could do.
What do you think it was that made someone like that go, wait a second, all I'm interested in is myself? I mean, what
Yeah.
breached that gap?
Sinking so low that I reached bottom, you know.
Okay.
I was in the middle of this battle in Vietnam, and I narrowly escaped with my life again there. But part of that battle was setting up a firing squad and shooting farm boys who'd been dragooned into the South Vietnamese army, but who had rioted and mutinied, and so the army wanted to shoot them, and I was part of that. And I realized, what the hell am I doing? I live 8,000 miles away. I hate this war. I was very anti-war. And
Hmm.
I'm only here because of the adrenaline rush. And now I just signed a death warrant for a bunch of kids. What the heck am I doing? And that was the
Hmm.
lowest point, and I described that in the book. It was the lowest point in my life. I couldn't go any lower. And I came back and went to survive that battle, came back, went to California, where the State Department sent me to Stanford for a year as a reward for not getting killed, I guess. And and I went to a bunch of what were then called encounter groups. Now we call them like group therapy or something, whatever.
Hmm.
And I spent a lot of time in Palo Alto trying to figure my life out. I also had a heavy case of what now we'd call PTSD because I was in
Hmm.
Vietnam. Every day could have been my last for a year and a half. And then came this firing squad thing and the battle and me reaching that low point. And I finally realized with the help of some of these encounter groups that I needed to change my life. And point of fact, I wasn't a monster. I was, in fact, a very feeling person. And a lot of other people really helped me out in that year at Stanford, these encounter groups, helping me realize that in point of fact, I was a compassionate human being, that I had a heart, that I really did care about other people. But my life of adventure had like put a plywood board over my
Hmm.
heart. So I
Hmm.
couldn't feel these feelings. I couldn't feel these feelings. All I could feel was the adventure. I was John Wayne. I wasn't Mother Teresa. I was John Wayne.
Right. Right.
And then
So
it gradually
what
changed.
did you do to start being less self-centered? Did you sort of have a plan or just kind of a step at a time?
I was a step at a time, and the first thing I did was the easiest thing was my own two children. I started being a father, coaching little league stuff like that.
Hmm.
We were posted back in Washington D.C. We lived in Virginia, and and then I realized that other people began to like me. In fact, that when I cared for them, they began to care back. So I was like, oh, yeah, I see. I can write a whole new book here. I mean, it's
Uh-huh.
like, so I began to climb out of that hole. There was a lot of backsliding. Boy, was there a lot of backsliding because I was in the Foreign Service still. And as a very prestigious part of the Foreign Service and running around in Europe in big black limousines and going to secret meetings and stuff was really kind of cool, very enticing,
Hmm.
very, very intriguing. And so it took me a while to figure things out. But then when I got to the United Nations, I could play on a much bigger screen. And that's where I mentioned that I helped end apartheid. I really did. Really helped end
Hmm.
apartheid. I really did help make a dent in America's relationships with the third world. We didn't up to that point give a damn about what we now call the global South, the poor nations of Africa and Asia. We didn't give a damn, other
Right.
than their vote in the General Assembly. We didn't give a damn. But I had seen the suffering of these countries, and I gradually did things way beyond my own orders. This is one of the most severe risks I took, was the risk of getting fired by working behind my own country's back for policies for peace and justice in the third world. And I did it, and I found out that I was succeeding more than I was failing. You know, the apartheid was only one thing. I did a lot of other things there that really did help move the global ball forward in terms of peace and justice issues. So I began to see that this was my life, and I knew I was always smart and tough. Well, I could, instead of being smart and tough and killing people, I could be smart and tough and saving people's lives. I could be smart and tough on dealing with hunger and disease, and that real revelation. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what were some of the policies, and how did you go behind the United States back? I take it they didn't want policies that you believed would be good.
Oh yeah. For example, the apartheid issue was even under Jimmy Carter, there was a look the other way attitude of the American government regarding black oppression of blacks in South Africa, which, as you listeners know, was called apartheid. And so I said, nah, this is terrible. I went down to South Africa and saw for myself, and apartheid was terrible. And I came back and I worked, and my own government said, go slow, John, go slow. Why? Because there are a whole lot of American companies selling guns and military equipment to the South African military. Yep. There was a whole lot of money involved. And there was, at that point in time, too, there were a whole lot of people in Congress, particularly in the Senate from the South, who were out and out racist and didn't want the United States to do anything that would upset the apple cart of those friendly racist people white people that ran South Africa. I said, screw that. And I went behind my own government's back. I even passed messages to the African nations that would allow them to send messages to my own Secretary of State that made America look bad. That created embarrassing moments for the United States government. I remember with great glee that I once saw a message that came from the Zambian foreign minister to the American foreign minister, Secretary of State Vance at the time. And it was just a really sharp message condemning the United States for its hypocrisy by saying all the right things about ending racism, and yet fomenting and supporting racism in South Africa because of the money made selling arms. And it really upset my own bosses. But the thing was, in the middle of that message, I saw a sentence that I myself had drafted 3 weeks before, given to my Zambian colleague. He'd given it to his foreign minister, and it had come rocketing back to my Secretary of State. Oh, I loved it. Anyway, I could have been fired. I could have been fired or even jailed for going behind my own government. The other thing that was a great story was I wasn't even supposed to talk to the Cubans because they were Castro Cubans. They were dirty commies, right? And I was forbidden to talk with them. Well, I knew perfectly well from my own intelligence that for crazy reasons, Fidel Castro, Cuba's leader, had very good relationships with the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was this guy that had taken over Iran.
I remember him.
Before. Yeah, right. Anyway, they had also taken over the American embassy, if you remember. There were like 120 Americans held hostage. At the end of Jimmy Carter's presidency.
I was quite young, but I remember that.
Yeah, and we couldn't get it. Carter couldn't get him out. So I had good relationships with the Cubans. I couldn't formally meet with them, so we would hang out in bars and restaurants around the UN, but we couldn't be seen doing that, or we'd both get into trouble. Anyway, we were both at a conference, the Cubans and me in Belgrade, then Yugoslavia, right? And the Cubans were my best friends at the United Nations. Why? Because they were fun-loving, and because we were all baseball nuts. So we would get together and talk about Red Sox pitching or whatever. And we just had great fun. So they invited me out for dinner in Belgrade. And we go to this workers' restaurant on the other side of the tracks because they wouldn't be seen in a fancy restaurant. They were, after all, communist socialists. Anyway, we all got roaring drunk over a dinner of rice and beans. And we literally took out the back of a napkin and roughed out a plan for getting the American hostages out of Iran in return for, quid pro quo, in return for the U.S. loosening the economic embargo we had imposed on Cuba. So the idea was, you get our people out of Iran, we'll lift at least a major part of our arms, of our economic embargo on your country. And that's the deal. Well, I figured, that deal in a napkin had disappeared along with the hangovers. But 2 weeks later, my buddy, now we're not supposed to talk, he comes up to me in the General Assembly Hall, and behind a pillar or whatever, he says, hey, John, he says with a Cuban accent, he says, the old man says we'll do it. I said, what are you talking about?
Oh, wow.
He says, Jesus, John, Castro, we talked to Castro. We brought the plan to Castro, and he says he'll do it. Oh, my God.
That's amazing.
I go running across the street.
This was during Carter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just before Reagan took office. Yeah. Like in December. So I go running across the street. Now, mind you, I had not told my own government about any of this because I would have been fired. But now I had no choice. So I go to my own government and I tell them exactly what I've been doing. They're not happy with that. They go down, they think about it, and then they say no. We can't take any chance of Castro getting credit for anything because we hate that bastard so much. So no, you're lucky we're not firing you. Okay. So it never happened. And those poor bastards taken prisoner in the embassy in Tehran had to stay there a whole other year because our own government wouldn't accept the plan that I had negotiated over a drunken dinner in Belgrade.
Right. And I think that's not only is a fascinating look at how just interpersonal relationships can affect the entire world. If you'd been at odds with these Cubans, that wouldn't have happened. The fact that somebody was standing on pride and who's going to get the credit rather than getting the right thing done, and I don't think anything's changed today, sad to say.
No.
I wanted to ask you, hearing this voice telling you your life is about healing, had you ever before hearing that felt that was your calling?
No. I had
so that was just shock.
It was, well, I'm sorry. No. I take that back. I'm sorry. I got the timeline wrong. Yeah, that was after I left the Foreign Service. So, and well after that battle in Vietnam. So I'd been crawling out of this hole, and all these people in the encounter groups had been telling me who I really was. They basically said, you're a nice guy. You're a very caring guy, and you're very smart, and you're very tough. You could be doing a lot of good in the world instead of playing John Wayne. And I was thinking about that the whole time. So when I got to the United Nations, I was ready for episodes like with the Cubans or with South Africa. Okay. Because I've been climbing back up there. Like I say, backsliding a lot. But nonetheless, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Then came this episode that I read, the episode that I just read, in which basically I hesitate then and now to call it God, but some higher power really spoke to me. The other guys didn't hear anything in that lifeboat, but boy, I heard it. And it basically says, oh, look, I mean, the full message was from God, from the higher power, was, look, you get out of this, you're going to lecture on another cruise ship, you're making tons of money giving stupid lectures about foreign policy, and you'll go from one cruise ship to the next. It's a very nice life. And we're going to put a stop to that, man, right here and now. You're either going to say, no, this is it. I'm going to embark on the life that I started at the United Nations, or not. And here are the alternatives. And I said yes. And then the rest of my life is 40 some years since, I have kept that promise. I have kept that promise with the Giraffe Heroes Project, which I really would like us to spend a little time on at some point in this. The Giraffe Heroes Project, I didn't start it. My wife, Ann Medlock, did. She's a lot smarter than I am. And it's an organization that is dedicated to making the world a better place by finding a hero and telling the stories of heroes, inspiring others, the rest of us, to be heroes too. We were doing it for 40 years. We've been marvelously successful. We're kind of the troubadours of our time. And I found that, and then Ann and I fell in love, and everything became way more important. And we've been working together now for 42 years on the Giraffe Project.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
So
it
started with the organization, and then you married her.
Well, it was like I met her at a group in New York City. I was still at the United Nations doing my anti-apartheid thing. She was a young mother making a living as a writer and editor in New York City. And she got fed up with the fact that the news everywhere, New York Times, Washington Post, was all about bad stuff, you know? It's all about the latest fire, the latest battle, the latest piece of violence in the world. She knew there were good people doing good things, but nobody was telling their stories. So she said, all right, I'll start my own network. If ABC, CBS, and NBC won't do it, I'll do it. I mean, she has had and has a lot of guts. She's one of the bravest people I know. So she starts this Giraffe Heroes Project, and she starts it with nothing. She's an apartment in New York City. And basically she starts finding people who are sticking their necks out. If she can, she interviews them, gets their story on tape. Then she goes, finds a movie star or a stage star, which was easy to do in New York City, to do the voiceover. And she creates little 2 and 3 minute audio and records them on vinyl discs. Now, some of your listeners, viewers,
might remember that.
Don't even know what a vinyl disc is, but it's called a record, right? It goes round and round. You put a needle on it, and sound comes out. So she was making these vinyl discs and sending them out to, at first, small radio stations who would or would not play them. And each little episode was the story of a giraffe hero telling their story, and then a voiceover by John Denver, other fairly famous people who would do the voiceover and making it. And anyway, it caught on, and within 3 or 4 years, she got a nice story in the New York Times, and then it all started booming from there. But I met her at the very beginning, and I thought, it couldn't possibly change the world. Storytelling seemed lightweight to me.
I think storytelling is what changes the world.
Well, of course, and that's the lesson I didn't see. I thought me getting up in front of a big stage and giving important speeches about world peace would be the way to change the world. Oh boy,
especially on a sinking cruise ship.
Oh man, boy, was I wrong. Yeah, I was so wrong. And then I met Anne, and she's starting this storytelling organization called the Giraffe Project. I think at first it's lightweight. Then I fell in love with it. Everything she was doing became a lot more powerful. And then but more to the point, I began to see she was not only a lovely person, she was also right. That storytelling, just as you said, storytelling is the most powerful way to change people's behavior. People have known that since Neanderthals dancing around their campfires. I mean, you want people to change. You want to change a culture. You tell people stories. You tell people stories of their heroes, and that's what Anne was doing. And I caught on to it. And now the Giraffe Project has been for a long time a booming global organization. I'm sure we'll get to there, but it's the URL is giraffe.org. I mean, it's very simple, and you can look at what we're doing and look at these fantastic stories. We found and honored now over 1,500 people, men and women, of course, every color in the rainbow. Some of them are only 12 years old. I think one of them was 102. I mean, everybody. We find heroes every place.
Yeah, we do need to move on to cocktail number 2, but we'll definitely talk more about Giraffe Heroes. So
I will say that your story about your wife is also reminiscent of the fact that I fell in love with my favorite author. Married the author of my favorite book.
Oh man. Oh.
I was going to mention some people are going to question your story about hearing a voice, but I had a similar experience, and it actually has to do with why we're back together. So let's go to cocktail number 3 and then reading number 3.
Yes, I had a little bit of a microcosm of your life experience when I was growing up in upstate New York, and I did a lot of rock climbing in the Shawangunks.
That's where we had,
yeah.
Shawangunks.
A lot of free climbing and rappelling and a lot of fun there. And it was some of the best times I ever had, you know?
Yeah. No, that's where I learned to rock climb in the Shawangunks. I remember some of those climbs. The Shockley remember Shockley's ceiling? One of the more famous.
Oh yes.
Climbs. Yeah. It was great. Yeah. You ended up hanging by your fingernails over 200 feet of space, and you had to do a pull-up to get to the next hold.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I remember that well. I was much younger than I am today.
Yeah, well, weren't we both? Yeah.
So the third drink we have here, regarding your healing touch, what would you experience during a healing touch except a tremendous burst of energy or light? And so I think this cocktail kind of speaks to that. It's a honey lemon spritz, and here we have this marvelous little glass. And it might end up being a little bit dilute by now, but It's done over crushed ice. And what we have is some vodka. We have some limoncello from Italy, a wonderful lemon cocktail. Some honey syrup, again, 1-to-1, similar to sugar and syrup for simple syrup, but this is honey syrup with honey. Some lemon juice and a little bit of club soda thrown in to give it a bit of spritz.
Oh, yeah, I see the spritz. Yeah. Oh.
The basic idea is after you've either healed or need healing, this might be the type of cocktail that would help.
Cheers.
Oh, that looks delicious.
It really
find
is.
it a little bland, to be honest.
Well, yeah. Add
Ice.
a little ginger liqueur. That's what I do if I feel a drink is too bland. Ginger liqueur gives that it'll give a little bit of sharpness to a drink.
Great idea. I like that. I love the limoncello in this because it's got that wonderful. You just summer. You're sitting on in Tuscany or whatever it is, bathing in the sun.
Yeah,
you get a wonderful sense of southern Italian lemons.
Right. It does have a nice flavor. It just doesn't have the kind of zing I'm used to in cocktails, but that might be because we made these ahead of time this time, so it's a little watered down.
You're still getting 2 ounces of vodka and some limoncello in it, so it's not like it's impactful.
You guys gonna be able to communicate for the next 20 minutes? Jesus, you've been drinking too.
Right. Go ahead with number 3.
Oh, okay.
If she starts speaking in tongues, it might be the cocktail.
I love it. Okay, all right. Now you want the third reading, do you? All right.
Yep.
Yes, please.
Here we go. Mystical experiences. Totally unexpected in my life. I mean, I fancied myself as a severe intellectual. After all, I have degrees from Harvard and Stanford. And I never thought of myself. All the rest of the stuff was airy-fairy, namby-pamby, new agey, whatever. Never got into it myself. Then I have experiences in Vietnam, and I'm trying to crawl back and find a new life for myself. And I'm having a lot of difficulty. And so my first wife then, who the marriage ended up in a divorce, but in any case, she saw something about a mystical guy named Francisco who was giving lectures at the local Holiday Inn not far down from our house. So she said, "Let's go. I mean, we've tried everything else to make our marriage work. Maybe this will help." So she and I go to this, and there's a guy. He doesn't look like a guru. He's a fat Puerto Rican guy in a bowling shirt, but he talks about mysticism in a very, very, very down to earth way. About like it's available to all of us. It's not a question of anything special. We can all be mystics. And he demonstrates that with some people in the audience or people on his own team of people going into trances out of a meditation. So we leave, and I think, oh, well, that's interesting. I don't think it has anything to do with me. Huh? That night, I wake up in the middle of the night, and the house is, as far as I can tell, the house is full of smoke, and there's a ringing in my head. And I wake up everyone, and I say, hey, the house is on fire. And they look at me as if I'm crazy because the house isn't on fire. And there's nothing going wrong except that I think the house is full of smoke. That's strange. Second night, same thing. Third night, same thing. So now I'm thinking, so I call this Francisco, this fat Puerto Rican's assistant. I had taken her card, and she says, that's not unusual. A lot of people who really have a lot of mystical abilities, and they're born with it, and they don't know it. They have funny experiences, and you're having these nightmares, being in a house full of smoke when it's not 3 times in a row. That's exactly the kind of stuff that happens. And so I think you should come to one of our more serious sessions about mysticism. And I have him in my house in Rockford, Maryland, Rockville, Maryland. Yeah.
Right.
So I decided to go, and because I don't know, I mean, it really kind of scared, like these, so I go and with my first wife, and the first thing that we do is meditate. Well, I'd never meditated. The idea of trying to turn off your brain seemed utterly crazy to me. But over a couple of weeks, I learned how to meditate. And then she says, "Okay, John," she says, "I want you to meditate. And this time, I want you to go deeper and deeper and deeper. Just let go." Okay. So I do that, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm falling off a cliff, and I'm heading straight into an abyss. And then all of a sudden, just before I hit the ground, I stop, and all of a sudden I find myself in this strange, crazy place. It's a place of light. It's a place of peace. It's not heaven. It's not hell. It's just something weird. And then I realized that I can lift myself out of my body. So I go up to a corner of the room and look at my own body sitting in a chair. And then I walk through the walls of the house into the evening neighborhood. And then I'm looking around, and then I come back. And then this woman who's running the session claps her hands, and I fall back into the chair out of this trance. And they're like, wow, what the hell happened? So now I'm really interested. I think either I'm going crazy or this is real. And if it's real, then everything I'm seeing out there and these out-of-body experiences have got to be real too. Because in these out-of-body experiences, I'm having some extraordinary insights into how the world worked, into what metaphysics really means and how the universe works. But it could all be crazy. I could be losing my mind. So I start. I do this repeatedly for weeks, going out of my body, and basically going into trance. And it developed later into a lot of other stuff. But at that moment, I'm still working for the Foreign Service, right? So I'm going into, it's really crazy. I'm going into work, and for 5 days a week, I'm turning Leningrad and Moscow into glass, as I said, working for the Nuclear Planning Group. But then on the weekends, I'm going to these trance sessions or going into trance myself. And doing having all these out of body experiences. So it's a real dichotomy, and I'm either I'm crazy or it's real. I better take it. So anyway, I say to whoever it is out there doing this, again, I don't call it God. It certainly isn't anything an organized religion. Whatever it is out there, I say, look, give me a sign. This is crazy. I want a sign. You can't just keep doing this to me. I got to find out. Either I'm crazy or I'm not. And within a few weeks, we're down, and here I pick up the thread. Okay. The out-of-body trips I took, beginning in the middle of 1975, were the most extraordinary experiences of my life. They were, exactly as Francisco had promised, meeting God face to face. I know my reports of them seem outrageous or even insulting to some, which you alluded to, but these things happened to me, and I'm relating them with as much honesty and accuracy as I can. I understood almost from the beginning that if these experiences were not hallucinations, dreams, or madness, that I found much more than just a metaphysical primer, a kind of user's guide to the universe. The discoveries I made out of body filled fundamental needs in me that, unmet, had confused and crippled me for decades. Most immediately, the experiences gave me a practical framework for living a responsible life. Humans were not abject beings, too sinful and weak to master earthly challenges without the help of some distant and capricious God. The reality I saw was governed far less by divine whim than by earthly cause and effect. That design demanded that we accept far more responsibility for the choices we made. And because we were each a part of the same whole, every choice we made affected everything else. I also learned from out-of-body experiences that what I'd felt on the McKinley River was true, that I was being saved for a higher purpose. That purpose was not to pursue power and status, as I'd hoped, sitting by my campfire in Tennant Creek, but to heal and to serve, to use my life to help bridge conflicts, to solve public problems, to support others in doing the same. I would carry out this purpose not as the cartoon Superman I'd tried for so long to be, but as who I really was, a gentle, caring man, my father's son, inspired by the ideals that had begun to rise in me, beginning with that dissenting report from Vietnam. These revelations were huge, encompassing every aspect of my life, answering questions that I'd wrestled with for decades. Still, knocked from my horse, I became no Paul. The forces that had shaped my life until then were very strong, and their impacts did not disappear overnight. There would be an embarrassing number of hesitations and backslidings ahead. My prove it intellect kept fighting a rear guard action. Despite the repeated experiences out of body, despite the obvious importance of revelations, I still had doubts that any of this was real. The doubts hung around like a bad cold, even though by now I was in so deep I knew that if what I was experiencing was not really happening, then the only other possibility was that I was insane. I wanted a sign. I got one. We were at a friend's farm in Charlottesville on a lazy Saturday afternoon in July. A lone hawk circled the south field, riding the hint of a breeze. The only sounds were insects buzzing and the shouts of kids riding in a hay wagon pulled by a snorting old tractor. The rest of us were sitting on the farmhouse porch, drinking fresh lemonade and talking. Suddenly, a 4-year-old boy, the son of another couple, came running toward the house, holding his left hand and shrieking. The other kids were quick at his heels, shouting that the boy had just put his hand on a hot tractor tailpipe. A quick look showed serious burns. The owner of the farm, a doctor, went inside for his first aid kit. The boy's mother held him, but the pain was intense, and the frightened child wailed even louder. What I remember next is a feeling of immense personal calm and confidence. I quietly asked the mother to give the boy to me. When she did, I put the boy's burned hand between my hands, closed my eyes, and imagined myself back in that place of light. The boy stopped screaming. When I took my hands away, his hand showed no signs of being burned.
That is a truly phenomenal story. Were there other healings after that?
No.
Okay, that was the one and only.
I think just to continue the thought, I think the purpose of that episode was simply to answer that question: was I insane or not? And all that was the connectedness gave me that sign. It was a sign, and I didn't lose my psychic powers. I can still read auras and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And in point of fact, after this incident, I really got deep into it, and I became the director of this organization, mystic organization, for all of Northern Virginia. And it was crazy because I would be planning nuclear war for part of the time, and the other part of the time I would be doing trance healing sessions and holiday inns myself. I mean, I would lead trances. Mm-hmm. I would exercise spirits. I would do all this mystical stuff because I could, out of body, I had this power.
So it's a little bit like leading a double life.
Yeah, absolutely, it was. Luckily, I had a boss at work who was a really hang loose guy. He kept joking that one day I was going to come to work in a white gown with light streaming out of my ears. Because he kind of.
Do you think there was any alignment between the miracle that occurred between your hands and your original Roman Catholic faith?
Oh no! I'm sorry. This is really going to insult all kinds of your listeners, but I thought then, and I still think now, that religion is an opiate. That you just get a lot of stuff. You're told a lot of stuff, but it doesn't really impinge on you.
I have one question. We're about to run out of time, although if you have time, we can stay after and put that elsewhere. I want to ask you, this is a fascinating quote that you have on your website where you say the most significant risks for most of us challenge not the body, but the soul. They're about finding what makes our lives truly meaningful and then going for it with everything we've got. I find that fascinating. What would you define as a risk to the soul?
The risks that test the soul for most people are like things like dealing with conflict, with compassion, being able to listen, being able to really care for other people, including people halfway around the world. All these things that. How to say it? Back in 50 years ago, they called them women's things. We're way too smart to know that. But all these things about compassion and healing and connectedness, those challenge a lot of people, and especially a lot of men. And so I do a lot of talking about that. I do a lot of public speaking, at least before COVID hit. And this is
Right.
what I get people's attention by telling my adventure stories, and then I segue into how I changed and what changed me. And what
Mhm.
changed me was what you just read. Everything I do, from 3-minute TikTok episodes to hour lectures, everything centers on that one sentence that you read. Most powerful. We all look for meaning in our lives, every single one of us. This goes back thousands of years. It's the most important thing
Yes.
for any of us. What's meaningful?
Mhm.
You look at the mirror in the morning, and who looks back from the mirror? You want to know you're not just here on the planet marking time. There's a reason for your existence. Well, what's the meaning? You
Right.
got to find it.
And
Yeah.
I think the key is getting to that point. My books happen to concern an arrogant, obnoxious trombonist, modern trombonist, who is not at that point. He's quite happy living a selfish, self-centered life. And you talk about living responsibly. He doesn't care. He's happy.
An arrogant trombonist is an oxymoron.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Both
give
play
him time.
trombone.
Give him
Yeah.
time. Give him time. You know, I of course I know plenty of people myself who are, the most important thing to them is power and money or whatever, and that's bless them. I mean, that's where they are, and some of them may die that way. But as you begin to, if you open yourself to experience, and if you really understand that meaning is important, it isn't just a little buzz in your head. Meaning is important. Then you look for where it comes from, and meaning might be simply developing a relationship with your grandchild. Or it may be making a major push to halt global warming, or something in between.
Right.
Or maybe it's Gaza, or maybe it's trying to talk to the political opponent in your family that just voted a different way than you just did.
Mhm.
I mean, you look for
Well, I
that
thought
meaning.
we solved that by punching each other.
Yeah, right.
What's this talking business?
You gotta find some way of, and everyone has their own
I
service.
fully agree with you. I watch too many politics on
Yeah. I mean, I tell people, look, you got to do an assessment of who you are. If you're
Right.
smart, well, that helps. If you've always had a good gift of drawing, then maybe it's something in the arts. If you've had a great mind for figures, then maybe it's being an engineer or a scientist, or whatever. But it's something out there, and you need to not
Right.
quit until you find it. And then when you do find it, it's how do you make it serve other people? If you're going to be a neurosurgeon, it isn't just to make a lot of money and occasionally save people's lives by operating on their brains. It's maybe discovering some whole new technique in which brain disease becomes a more manageable issue just because of what you did, or etc.
Right.
We can all come up with our own examples.
Yes.
But you need to keep looking.
Laura?
Yeah. We need to wrap up. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, online it's Graham, GRAHAM, at Giraffe, just like the animal, GIRAFFE.org. Websites are, as I said, giraffe.org, and my own personal website is my name, johngraham.org. And the book from which I've been reading.
Yes, go ahead.
My book, I'm sure the way is called Quest: Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning. Order it from your bookstore, get it from Amazon, whatever.
Yes. And Laura, where can we find you and
So,
Books and Brews?
You can find us at booksandbrews.net. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/@books spelled out. I am at Laura Vosica, where you can find all of my books except
this latest one,
Cooking with Rabbit, because
Cooking with Rabbit. Oh man,
yeah,
no.
I've been so busy eating the rabbits. I haven't updated my website. We are at glenmerrillfarms.wordpress.com, where you can see our adorable rabbits, sheep, and chickens aren't adorable. They're funny, but they're not adorable.
And it's not Cooking with John Updike's version of rabbit, by the way. It's actually cooking with real rabbit.
Real rabbit.
Yeah, no, I got it.
Yeah, and
yeah.
aprons. So for the queasy, we're actually cooking the rabbits.
And John, do you have any upcoming events?
No, I'm doing it all online now. I'm 82 now, and I hate getting myself stuffed into an airplane, and I used to have a worldwide lecture business going, but I just can't do it anymore. I just don't want to do it anymore. And I found that my use of social media has been fantastic. I do 3 or 4 podcasts a week and interviews, shows, and then my latest thing is 3-minute videos on TikTok for 22-year-olds under the meme "Badass Granddad." So all of you listeners,
I love it.
All of you listeners on TikTok or Instagram, I'm on Instagram as well. Dial up "Badass," one word, Granddad with 2 D's. Badass Granddad. I've done 11 episodes so far. They're 3 minutes long, and they include an adventure story plus some lessons learned and a call to action.
Fantastic!
Oh, you'll love them. You'll love them. I think I'm getting great. I've reached 60,000 viewers in just 2 months, so I'm getting there.
That's great. Fantastic.
That's great.
Laura, do you happen to have any events coming up?
We have just put out our new anthology, GabrielSornPress.com. The anthology on music is out. The anthology poetry on faith is about to come out. And we are about to begin accepting submissions for 2025's anthology, whose theme is children.
Fantastic. Oh. And do we happen to know, I know we've lapped the shores of the most interesting guest we could have ever had. But I'm wondering if there's another interesting guest coming up on our podcast.
Yes. Next month, and now I haven't verified this with her because I've been down feeding rabbits and being amazed that our boy is a girl.
Yeah, there is no. Yeah.
So I didn't follow up with her on time. But next month, we should have Joni Wright Lewis, who is an author and illustrator. She writes children's books, humor, books on writing, and children's educational books, so quite a wide variety. She is currently RVing. Is that an actual verb? RVing?
We have done that.
It is now because I said it.
Yeah, right.
Once you say it, it's a word. She's RVing around the lower 48 states with her husband, and her newest book, The Best of When Two Old Farts Traveled, she expects to be out by Christmas. Hopefully this episode will be out by Christmas, so you'll all know.
If they're both old farts, hopefully they have good ventilation in their RV.
Hey, I got. Can I offer something? Well,
yeah.
The Giraffe Project. We really should put sometime in 2025. Ann Medlock, MEDLOCK, who is the founder, and my wife, but nonetheless, she has an incredible, interesting, powerful life.